Welcome to our Forced Adoption webinar. This is our 7th webinar in a series that we've been bringing to you over the last year or so. The topic for tonight, as you're probably aware, is providing support through search, contact and reunion. And we're very pleased to have a panel who I'll introduce in a moment, and very pleased to have a number of people joining us so far, and that list is growing, and we can see people sharing some weather stories and from around the country, including of course some stories, a bit update from some of the floods and things in Queensland. So thank you all very much for joining us. I'm Lynn O'Grady and I work here at the Australian Psychological Society. I manage a number of the strategic development projects here, including the Forced Adoption project, and I've been facilitating these webinars and working on the e-learning project for a year and a half or so now. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present. They hold memories, traditions, culture and hopes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians, and of course the elders who are in this community where we are in Melbourne are the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and you'll be mindful of, I'm sure, of the custodians in your own communities. And very mindful also of the Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people who are also affected by forced adoption experiences and the complications of that in relation to ongoing struggles and intergenerational trauma associated with a whole range of life events for Aboriginal people. Forced adoption training, hopefully you're all familiar with this and hopefully you're enrolled and have been working your way through these courses, and these webinars have really been designed to complement and to take some of these topics a little bit deeper, and through our panel discussions these help us just to explore some of the topics through the case study examples. But hopefully you have been enjoying the courses and you can see there the topics that are covered. And there's a whole lot of sort of topics that come across, things like self-care as well, and ways of working and principles, key principles for doing that work. So they're worth a look, and we're getting great feedback. So if you haven't done that already, make sure that you do, and we'll provide more details at the end of the session tonight. I'd also like to acknowledge people affected by past forced adoption policies and practices, and people who we're drawing on in terms of, I guess, stories and thinking about in terms of the work that we're doing and the reasons for this project being developed. And for those people, often it's ongoing, it's challenging and very much part of their lives and great variety of experiences. So we're always mindful of that, and again mindful of the work that we're doing to support them as well as we can as health professionals. Tonight's topic, as I said, is providing support through search, contact and reunion, and you've already seen the case study, hopefully, and the learning outcomes, so they're just there again. So the focus is very much on practitioners supporting people affected by past forced adoption policies and practices, with a particular focus on the search, contact, reunion process tonight, looking at core principles of best practice when supporting people affected, and particularly around this particular process, and how we can integrate those core principles into the day-to-day interactions that we might be having with clients as part of overarching service provision. Now tonight's panel, we've got a couple of people. One of them will be familiar to people who've been doing the training, and one of them is brand new to us tonight, but we're very pleased to have people who are experienced and working in the field who can really tease out some of these rather complex issues. So we have Catherine Cooper, and Catherine is a Senior Counsellor of Past Adoption Support Services at Relationships Australia in South Australia. So welcome, Catherine, and this is the first time we've had the pleasure of you working with us, so thank you very much for joining us. And you've been doing this work at Relationships Australia for a little while. Is there something about the work that you find very beneficial or interesting that sort of keeps you working in this field with this client group?
I've been working with Relationships Australia for over 12 years, and in this particular area of post-adoption support for the last 6 years. Certainly the search, reunion, contact and reunion work is really rewarding and very complex. It's something that we do a lot of, and we do a lot of facilitated reunions as part of our process within the service. I'm also a counsellor and provide a lot of counselling for people who've been impacted by past forced adoption. And so I do some very long-term work with people, shorter-term work, and again, that's very rewarding. And it's been a really fascinating area to work in for me.
Yeah, great. So we're looking forward to your considered advice and suggestions tonight, and thinking through the case study that we've been working on with you for the last few weeks. So thank you very much for that. And Jenny, Dr. Jenny Conrick is a social worker, and Jenny, you're one of our regulars now. We've worked with you a few times, and people will have seen you on the e-learning as well. And this is also something you've been working with for a really long time, and have completed some doctoral studies recently as well. So again, what is it that's kind of special about this area compared to other work that you might do as a social worker?
Yeah. Thanks, Lynn, and hi everybody. I found this particular area of work extremely significant, moving and important, because the populations of people who are affected by adoption are such a hidden group, and often I think because of it's a hidden group, they've been little understood, and often many other counsellors don't appreciate the lifelong impact of adoption and the ripple effect that adoption can have across families and generations. So to be able to bring some light and some understanding and assistance, I think is so important.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. That's again looking forward to your contribution tonight as well, and really drawing on those years of experience. So thank you very much. The people who participated in our webinars before, and we know there's always some people who keep coming back and some names that we see each time, which we're really pleased about, but we also know that we're attracting new people all the time. So it's probably very important that we do go through these ground rules, and if people have participated in webinars before, some of this you'll know and be familiar with. But for people who haven't, it's really important that you kind of understand how things work, I guess. So the general chat box, which you've been talking about where you're from and weather and things, is available for everybody, and that is something that everybody can see. So comments in there or questions or anything that you say in there can be seen by everybody. So I think it can be helpful to be thinking about that as if we're in a group, they're the things that you're saying and everyone can hear. So just being mindful of that, and that, you know, if it was a face-to-face professional development activity, what would you be doing, and thinking about it in the same way. We're really pleased for you to participate. We really want to have your comments and questions in there. But for some people, they find that that's a bit distracting, because it can get quite busy as we start to get into the panel discussion and have some questions and answer. There can be lots going on in there. So for some people, they find that's a bit distracting and they can't listen and watch and do all of that. So you can use that little arrow at the top of the boxes and just reduce that, so you don't actually have to see that. You can see also the technical support box there is flashing. That's where you go if you need some help with technical support. So if sound's a problem or other things that are not working so well, we have Redback people here who are able to respond to you. So that's the box to use, so that you'll get some help there, and they can give you a phone number to call in on if you're getting stuck. Other things to be thinking about is also that this topic is a difficult one, and for some people they're working in this space and this will be very familiar to them. They'll really know the topic and they'll be very familiar with it. For other people though, it might be the first time that you've actually heard about this and you're curious and you're wondering what does this mean and what happened. And for people, when we first hear about it, and I remember when I first started working on this project, it's quite unbelievable to hear the sorts of things that happened, and it can be quite distressing to hear that. So we just want to alert you to that. We also know that there are some people who are interested in this topic and working in the field because of their own personal experiences. So just again wanting to remind people about that and to think about what are the ways that you can be mindful of that and do the things that work for you in terms of your own self-care. So that's a really important point just to bear in mind, when we're in a setting like this where we can't actually see how you are and what's happening. So just be mindful of that as well. We will begin in a moment with a video which will just be a bit of a recap for people who've seen it before, but we do think it's important just to give us that basic kind of understanding of what what we're talking about when we're talking about forced adoption policies and practices, and the apology that Julie Gillard gave a number of years ago now, and just to get us into that space, I think, and remind us about why this is so important. So let's move to that now.
Shamed, silenced and lied to. For decades, women had their babies removed, all for the want of a wedding ring. Forced adoption was a practice shaped by societal mores of the 1940s, but it continued right up until the 80s. Over the past few years, there's been a chorus of formal apologies as each state sought forgiveness for its role. Today, the federal government added its voice.
Today, this Parliament, on behalf of the Australian people, takes responsibility and apologises for the policies and practices that forced the separation of mothers from their babies, which created a lifelong legacy of pain and suffering. We acknowledge the profound effects of these policies and practices on fathers, and we recognise the hurt these actions cause to brothers and sisters, grandparents, partners and extended family members. We deplore the shameful practices that denied you, the mothers, your fundamental rights and responsibilities to love and care for your children. You were not legally or socially acknowledged as their mothers, and you were yourselves deprived of care and support. We apologise.
In Australia from the mid-1940s through to the early 1980s, state and federal governments, churches, charities and hospitals, medical staff and bureaucrats were involved in the forcible removal of newborn babies from their mothers. Unmarried and often young, these mothers were viewed as unfit to parent their own children. Their babies were placed into adoptive families, usually with couples unable to have children of their own. This confidential, irrevocable process severed all links between a child and its parents and was known as closed adoption. The effects of forced adoptions on the mothers, the fathers, the adopted people themselves and their families have been lifelong and in many cases intergenerational. Mothers' advocacy groups have since lobbied for recognition and acknowledgement of the harm these policies and practices have caused. Initially, 2 state government inquiries into past adoption practices in Australia were held, and in October 2010, Western Australia became the first state to offer an apology to people affected by forced adoption. In February 2012, the Senate Community Affairs Reference Committee tabled a groundbreaking report into the Australian government's involvement in past forced adoption practices. This report followed an 18-month inquiry in which hundreds of people gave evidence. Following the report, all the remaining state and territory parliaments, apart from the Northern Territory, offered their own apologies. And in March 2013, then Prime Minister Julia Gillard offered an apology on behalf of the federal government to all people affected by the policies and practices of forced adoption. The Australian government has since allocated funding to support the development of guidelines and training materials for health professionals working with people affected by forced adoption policies and practices. This e-learning program has been created as part of this response.
Okay, so hopefully that has given us a chance to get into the space of the sorts of things we're going to be talking about tonight, and certainly the extent of the impact, and it comes through, I think, really very clearly on that video. So even if you've seen it before, I think it's still, for me, watching it again and again, it still has quite an impact. So hopefully that's also useful for people who are unfamiliar with what this actually means. So the way we're going to go through the session tonight is that we've got the case study that hopefully you've had a chance to look at, and we'll just recap that in a moment. You'll also see a little folder in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, which includes the case study, includes the slides for tonight as well, and some other supporting information. So you're certainly welcome to have a look at that. And we're going to then hear from each of the panellists in turn, and then we'll have some time for questions and answer. During the presentations, we're very happy for you to include some comments and ask questions, and we have some people, Margie and Nat from the APS, who are here behind the scenes as well with the Redback people, and Sarah from MHPN. So it's quite a big team that put these webinars together. They'll be monitoring some of the chat, and they'll be giving you some information and sharing some links and things if that's required. But they'll also be shooting some of your questions and comments through to me so that I don't have to kind of keep up with absolutely everything that's going on there. So please use that chat facility and give us something, questions and things that we can hopefully get to. We may not get to all of them, but we would really like to hear them. It just helps us to make this as useful for you as possible. So here's the case study. We're talking tonight about Jack, a 63-year-old man and his wife Rebecca. Have been married for 30 years and have 2 adult children. And Jack recently found out some news that he fathered a son, whose name is now Philip, and this happened in the 1970s, and Philip was put up for adoption. And Jack, on hearing this news, talks about a range of feelings, so complete shock when he received this phone call from Anna, who was his old flame, an old girlfriend at that time, who he'd had a close, loving relationship with when he was a young man back in the 70s, and he hadn't been aware of the pregnancy, hadn't been aware that Philip had been born until this had recently come to his attention. So Philip had sought Anna out, and in his letter to her, he noted that he didn't have any interest in finding out about his father. Jack's name wasn't listed on the birth certificate, and so he didn't want to take the risk of being rejected if he was to contact Jack, and didn't get a good response. So Anna stated that she hopes to convince Philip that he should make contact with Jack. So we've got this new kind of, or renewal of this relationship now between Jack and Anna and Philip there. Jack sought support from Post-Adoption Support Service for assistance to help him make sense of the situation and to understand his rights as Philip's biological father, and to make sense of what this means for him in his current situation with his wife and adult children. So there's lots going on for Jack. So Jenny, let's hear from you. What are your kind of thoughts? Where would you begin if you were thinking about how you'd be working with Jack if he came to see you?
Yes, thanks, Lynn. Well, I guess starting with Jack himself, Jack records the shock and disbelief that he had on learning this news. He feels angry, he feels regret, shame, and he may even ask himself, am I really this boy's father or this man's father? At this point, he's not clear on what he hopes for their future relationship. Everything is possibly in a real turmoil for him. He's also confronted with Anna, his old girlfriend, and now after so many years, he's having to enter into another relationship with her and renegotiate something that is tinged with all past feelings and experiences, and that can be a very disconcerting and confronting experience. He's hearing from Anna that Philip at this point doesn't want contact with him, that in fact Philip is feeling rejected by him, and so I guess there's many things Jack doesn't know about Philip, such as what he was, what he's really feeling, what it was like for him growing up in his adoptive family, what has Anna told him about their relationship and about him as a person. And he doesn't know at this point anything about Jack's own family of procreation. I guess the other parties involved in this too are Rebecca and the children of Jack and Rebecca's marriage. It seems that at this point Jack hasn't broken the news to her that he's learned of another son, and he's kept a secret from her, and I guess not only will she and the children have to negotiate their own feelings of shock, but also the fact that in the first instance Jack didn't discuss this with her. He went to a post-adoption service. So there's so many things happening for Jack and Anna and Philip, and potentially for Rebecca and the children. I think it also is good at this point to consider the legislation that's in place around access to adoption information. I work in Victoria, and so our Adoption Act 1984, with the amendment to the Act that occurred in 2013, means that mothers and fathers can obtain identifying information about their children if they're named on the birth certificate or if they're named in substantially in the file documentation that accompanies the certificate. If no such information is available, the situation then needs to be considered by our DHHS staff, which is fine. And I bring this to consideration because Jack may decide that he wants to apply for records himself, and it may be a direction that he takes in thinking about approaching Jack independently. However, if he decides not to approach Jack independently but uses Anna as a conduit, then I guess that falls into the private realm, and he just negotiates with Jack through Anna herself. I think there are long-term impacts for everybody in this situation. And contact, when you have contact with relatives who are separated by adoption, it's a very personal journey. It can involve a huge roller coaster of emotions and thoughts. It may help to have some understanding of the adoption practices that occurred in the 70s that may help Jack understand Anna's responses and reactions. But I think over time life can be tipped upside down and many relationships have to be renegotiated. Many decisions have to be made, and just trying to make these in the swirl of emotions can be very difficult. It's very important that Jack goes at his own pace through this process while considering the pace of others who are involved. If he decides to seek Jack out himself, he's got to really start to think about what is Jack prepared to accept, how is Jack going to accept an approach. And there can be this push-pull between people who want to move forward quickly and others who want to hold back. And there can be impatience, misunderstanding, miscommunication, so many things that can make individuals feel rejected or unwanted or angry or misunderstood. So contact can be slow or it can be quick. Some people have different expectations of contact. Jack may want to really establish contact with Philip as a long-lost son, whereas Philip may think, I know nothing about you and you weren't there, and so I really just want information, if he wants contact at all. So expectations can be very different between parties, and this can also lead to misunderstanding and a real whirlwind of emotion. There can also be many challenges over the long term for extended family members. It's possible that if Jack and Philip form a relationship, that may have implications for for Rebecca and the children. Children may feel displaced. Children of the marriage may feel displaced. Rebecca may feel that Jack and Philip's relationship is perhaps very intense at the beginning, and this could cause jealousies and misunderstanding. There could be definitely an ongoing renegotiation of relationship between Jack and Anna, and also Jack's parents, if they're still living, or his siblings, may have a need to have things sorted out with Jack around Philip's presence. Always very important that Jack considers his own support needs. Are there people in his life who he can go and speak to when things are difficult and challenging, where there can be a quiet space for him to consider where to go next? I guess for the counsellor or the therapist who is presented with a situation where contact and reunion is being considered, I guess this complexity really needs to be held in mind, that the therapist needs to become very attuned to the person that they're working with, and that there needs to be a partnership in this, where that is led by the person who's seeking contact or who's considering contact, in this instance, Jack. The counsellor needs to listen to the language that the client is using and use that language. It's not uncommon for people to use the language of the 70s or 80s, even though we may use language differently. So in the 70s and 80s there were birth mothers, birth fathers, whereas now we often refer to people as mothers and fathers. So just listen to that language and go with what is comfortable for your client. Don't assume anything about their experience. Don't assume you know the direction they're going to go in or what's best for them. That's something you need to support and assist people to understand and sort out for themselves. We need to accept what's being told to us and be gently curious about people's experience. We need to feel free to validate feelings and experiences while appropriately reframing where appropriate, so that understanding can be extended. We need to go at our client's pace. We need to assess for their safety. Are they becoming too depressed, too anxious, too emotionally labile? Do they need some other sort of assistance? We certainly need to be consistent and genuine in our work with them, and we need to be prepared for rupture at times within our relationship and really pay attention to repair, because I think when there's been a separation through an adoption experience, it's not uncommon for ruptures to occur, and some clients to consider that that's almost the end of the world. When it's not, we can, through a therapeutic relationship, model that relationships can be renegotiated and reclaimed. I think we need to very much pay attention to endings in relationships as well, because these can be an opportunity, again, to see that endings are not the end, and that they can be a positive thing and not just an abandonment. I think there are other considerations, such as I've mentioned, the immediate support for Jack after contact with Anna. I've mentioned that the historical and social context could be of assistance to Jack, and I think certainly of assistance to the therapist and counsellor as we consider what was appropriate, but what was happening then and what we now don't consider appropriate. We certainly need to provide support and manage hopes, expectations and decisions, and always keep in mind that it is Jack's choice as he starts to think about what he would like to do in relation to all the others who are involved in this situation. So we facilitate while holding different perspectives. And I think that's about all I've got to say. I'm sorry, Catherine, if I have taken over some of your slides. I didn't realise I was doing that. So my apologies for that.
Thanks, Jenny. And I think there were lots of things when we talked last week. Lots of things that you both had to say that were similar. So it kind of makes sense that you're continuing to move on and build on that. But I do think there's other perspectives that Catherine can bring. So Catherine may have some more to add there. I just want to pick up before we do that about the language, because this is something that we laboured over, and you probably remember having conversations with us, Jenny, when we were looking at the e-learning and the language of search, contact and reunion. So you talked about some of the language around birth mother and birth father and how it may have been spoken about. And we know that in this forced adoption area, language it's a real potency. So the words we use can be really damaging in lots of ways, and people can be very hurt and upset by the language. So the notion of reunion, I just don't want to lose this for later. So the notion of reunion, do you want to talk a little bit about that and some of the ways people might respond to that, even talking about reunion when perhaps it doesn't fit with what people's experience is?
Absolutely, and I guess for Jack and Philip, they have never met. And so how can it be a reunion for them? In fact, for them it's a first meeting, and it's negotiating a relationship that neither knew about. Jack didn't even have in his mind initially that there was a baby who now is a man. So for him it's a very different experience, say, to that of Anna's, I would imagine. And certainly for Philip, he may not consider Jack at all in the life of a father, or he might just consider him as the man his mother had a relationship with. So it's, yes, language is extremely powerful, and we need to be aware of that, I think. And really go, I think, with the language that our client is comfortable with. That then becomes complicated, I think, when there are outreaches and contacts made, and one party likes to refer to themselves or others with one set of words, and the other party likes to use the other. So there's been a lot of negotiation, I think, that needs to occur.
Yeah. So listening and checking is probably really important. One of the things Susan said right early on when we presented the case study was very impactful context we are presented with, and I think you've really started to tease out some of those practical considerations, emotional, psychological considerations, family, relationships, identity. There's a whole lot in there. So I think it probably is a good time now to move on to Catherine and just to pick up on where Jenny started and pick up on some of those points and expand on those, Catherine. And don't forget people to include some questions and some comments as you're listening to Catherine. If there are questions you have of Jenny, add them in there, or as you hear things from Catherine, you'd like a bit more information or comments or questions, please put them in the chat box and we'll come back to them then. Thanks.
Thanks, Lynn. And thanks, Jenny. You went through my first slide, but I really appreciate that. And I'll just continue on now with the presentation. So these are the other considerations that were gone through before. But many clients make first contact, and this may have happened with Jack by phone, and so the engagement really begins at this stage. Jack's likely to talk through some of the reasons he's contacting the service during this call, and this is our very first engagement with him, or could be. During the phone intake process, it's important to listen to his story, be empathetic and supportive. Jack may not have explained what has happened to anyone before, and so may struggle to find the words to explain, or he may feel that he's not making sense. Showing that you understand and have knowledge of past adoptions and complicated family situations can be reassuring to Jack at this initial stage. At the first appointment, we need to respectfully take time to listen empathetically to Jack's story and provide encouragement to talk about his responses to the news from Anna, and acknowledge the impact from the shock he has received and explore and reflect his feelings. Jack has access service to try and make sense of the situation he's found himself in. So what will help Jack to make sense of the situation? Jack may be in a position where he has no idea about that, or he may have some thoughts around it. But we need to be reassuring about working through this with him to help him feel clearer about his options. We need to be curious about the impact from the way that he has received this news from Anna and how this has affected him on a day-to-day basis. So some of the things that might be impacting that we might want to explore with him are whether there are physical impacts. So has his sleep or eating patterns been affected? What sort of emotional impacts there have been? Has he seen increased worry, stress or anxiety levels? How is his relationship being affected with his partner and family? And it would also maybe of interest to know if there's any past history of Jack having experiences like this or feeling this way before that we could explore with him. We need to gently inquire about Jack's supports. Is there anyone he's been able to talk to about this? We know he hasn't told his wife or his children, but is there a family, a friend or another family member, work colleague or another medical professional, perhaps a trusted GP that Jack has been able to talk to about this? If Jack has this kind of support, it'd be really helpful for us to know, would he continue to have this support? And could this person, whoever they might be, be able to help Jack with some of the challenges he feels around talking to his family. For instance, if it was a trusted family member, is there any help they could provide around sharing this information with his family? If it was another medical professional, getting some idea about what they might be, how they might be supporting Jack, and how he would see our services working together, or would he see our services working together to support him? So at times there might be a client referred to our service, to the post-adoption service, for very specific search, contact and possible reunion work. And there may be another health professional that has referred that person. So we would hopefully work in partnership to continue to support that client around the specific needs that they've brought to the service. Oh, I didn't change my slide, sorry. If appropriate, providing information about past forced adoption practices may also support Jack to make some sense of his situation and that of others involved. We don't want to minimise the impacts Jack is experiencing, and any information about past forced adoption practices needs to be introduced appropriately, sensitively and gently. In our case study, Philip was born to Anna during the forced adoption era, and she has told Jack in their recent contact that her family forbade her to tell Jack about the pregnancy, and that she had wanted to keep the baby but was not given any choice, and the baby was adopted by a married couple. Anna has told Jack that she has been too ashamed and traumatised by the experiences and has not spoken of it since. It may help Jack to make sense of what Anna has told him, to know that Anna's experience was not an isolated one, and there have been many documented cases of this happening for women who were pregnant, unmarried and married during the forced adoption era. So the stigma and the shame experienced by women who were pregnant out of marriage was extreme, and it was often the case that parents or other family members might be making a decision about what might happen in that case. This might help bring some understanding of Anna's perspective for Jack, and also might have some impact on the feelings of anger Jack has been holding around not being told. Might help him to inform that a little more. The societal perception was that fathers didn't care about their pregnant partner and their child, or they were not told of the pregnancy at all. So fathers were often disregarded, and there was very little consultation or involvement. So it may help Jack to know that it was common practice to not record the name of fathers if the couple were not married. So the records generally stated that a mother was single, giving the impression that there was no father of any significance, with no thought given to the importance of recording his name along with that of mothers. So this might help Jack to understand why he was not on the birth certificate. It also might be helpful at some point with Philip too, as he doesn't understand or doesn't know that why his father was not on his birth certificate, and has perceived that as that he abandoned the relationship. There are many times when mothers have been looking at adoption records for the first time and see father unknown or father unnamed, when they had in fact told people who the father was. So this is very confronting, and it's at times like these when we do hear stories of fathers who were present, were available, and who did want to be named as the father. However, this was ignored. So adoptees also see this information on their records and ask, why isn't my father's name there? So this can be really confusing. When fathers call our service for support with searching, we would caution them with regards to not having an expectation that their names will be recorded, even if they recall insisting on this at the time of their child's birth. This information would really need to be provided sensitively to Jack, alongside the recognition that the Commonwealth and state have apologised for these past practices. Well, I'll just go back, sorry. So what are Jack's rights? Jack is concerned about his rights, and what rights he may have to access information about Philip would depend on the state in which the adoption took place and their adoption legislation. So Jenny talked about Victoria, and I work in South Australia. So in South Australia, we still have the Adoption Act of 1988 currently being reviewed, and there'll be a revision to the Act enacted this year, so there'll be some changes, but it still makes provision for a father who acknowledges paternity to make an application. And if they can provide enough evidence that would satisfy the Chief Executive, the adoption information might be released to them. But this is really considered on a case-by-case basis. And if they are named on the adoption file or in the birth certificate, then the information would definitely be released to them. But we know it's very rare for a father to be named in South Australian files. So often, the only way that a father may be able to get information about a child that they know was adopted is to try and provide evidence of their claim paternity and provide evidence of that paternity. So understanding Jack's hopes and expectations and how to support and manage these, we should be exploring with Jack what his hopes and expectations may be in having contact with Philip. How will he feel more ready to be in contact with Philip? Does Jack want to make an application to get the adoption information he may be entitled to relating to Philip's adoption from the state authority? And what does that mean in terms of time? Because sometimes you might be talking about 3 months, it might be 6 months in some states, so there can be really differing levels of time that it might take to actually obtain that information. Philip has initiated the contact with Anna, and he did not know about Jack until that time, because Jack wasn't in the record. He may have had an idea of a father, but he didn't have his name and he didn't know any information about his father. So we need to support Jack to understand that Philip has taken a risk in making contact with Anna, as he is fearful of another rejection. He's indicated that. And Philip has no way of knowing about Jack until this contact that he made with Anna. So there may need to be some time for Philip to develop his relationship with Anna before he may be more ready to have contact with Jack. You have to look at balancing Jack's potential need to explain his not knowing about Philip and how much that's been distressing for him, and that idea that he might want to set the record straight with Philip, alongside things like taking time to talk with his family and building support for the potential of any future contact with Philip. We can look at the role that Anna might play in the contact with Philip. So currently Jack has contact with Anna. They've have been back in touch again over this, but do they plan to have any further contact or to have any connection again? Anna's talked about being ashamed and traumatised by the experience all those years ago. So how might this impact for Anna if there's this additional want for her to be the contact between Jack and Philip? Support services, making contact with Philip on behalf of Jack. So our support service would offer a service that would say we can assist you to make contact with Philip. But this could include a whole range of different services, and we'd look at how we would provide that service. The ongoing support, I thought that Jenny really covered that very well, the ongoing supports and also the short and long-term impacts. So that's it from me. I think my time might be up. Thank you.
That I'm sure people at home or in their workplaces are taking in and trying to think about the context that they might be finding themselves in their workplaces. So the complexity and this web, I guess, is what I'm hearing from you, Catherine, that there's various interactions and past relationships coming to the fore, but changing relationships along the way. So I think the message again is going slowly, getting information and helping Jack to make sense of that historical period and to give him some information so he's got the context that he can understand how this happened, because as we've talked about previously, not everybody sort of understands that. So for him to get information about that. Of course, this often brings up questions, and we've got a question from Elizabeth about other kinds of adoption. So historically unforced adoptions where the fathers have been named on birth certificates. So I'm not sure if that's something that you or Jenny can answer in terms of adoptions more broadly, whether or not this is something that happens where fathers' names aren't necessarily included. Does either of you like to comment on that?
In terms of past adoption or?
Yeah, the question is unforced adoptions historically in Australia. So when they're not forced, so adoptions more generally in the past, what role, I guess, have fathers been seen or have fathers' names been included in other circumstances?
I guess, look, I'm not 100% sure actually. Sorry.
No,
In terms of unforced adoption, but
yeah. Jenny,
do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking that probably it varied as much with as with forced adoptions. But I think in those days it was still shameful to record someone's name, or I think it was quite common to keep fathers' names away from birth certificates. So I think whether adoptions could be termed forced or not forced, you could have either, really. Yeah, sometimes, yes, fathers' names just weren't placed there for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, so very complex. One of the things that we talked about last week was the differences between the states and the differences in times. And so we made the decision that we should you talk to each your own experiences, so Jenny's experience in Victoria and knowing that legislation very well, and similarly you, Catherine, in South Australia, and you flagged that things are changing in terms of legislation and that there might be some changes happening. So this is a kind of a changing space, and so people looking at this podcast later might want to check that out. But we also thought that it was very difficult without that state-by-state context to give advice or to actually share information that we didn't know so closely. But we have got a question in New South Wales from Roseanne. Is there any way adoptee can find out who the father is if mother refuses to provide the name? So we might not know specifically about New South Wales, but would either of you like to comment on that in terms of the adoptee wanting to make contact with the father and the mother says, no, I'm not going to tell you, father's name is not on the birth certificate? What would you, I guess in Victoria, South Australia, what would be the situation? That might give us a bit of an idea, but then people will need to check in their own states.
I think in Victoria, the first thing is to go to the birth certificate, and if the father's name isn't there, then there are often accompanying documents, either if the child was in a baby's home for a time, or if there were other circumstances that were recorded in a case file, he may or may not be named there. I think, so that may give a clue or may not. I think then once a contact is made, an adopted person, for example, if birth mother doesn't want to reveal the name, they may in fact develop relationships with other family members who may have an indication or an idea. So there may still be grandparents who are living or siblings who may have some information. But I guess if nobody knows and the mother does not, and often mothers can find it extremely difficult to reveal the name of someone they conceived a child with because of the circumstances surrounding conception and birth and the whole shame and rejection at that time, that they just do not want to go there. And so I guess if nobody is able to tell you and there's nothing in the records, then it's very, very difficult. I think these days, I do know adoptees who are starting to, and no one recommends this, but it's an option, people start to go to some of the websites where they can have their DNA circulated, and there's a worldwide search for family members using DNA. Some people do that with all sorts of varying results. Yeah, I don't know what your state's like, Catherine.
We would have a number of people who would certainly using DNA testing and using some of the available international sites to be able to track down family members. I guess also there are times when we've worked with people where they're not able to get information or find out who the father is from their mother, and there can be many, complicated reasons why that may be the case. And sometimes we've worked with people who have waited for a period of time and have perhaps been able to make contact with other family members who may be able to give them some information to help to understand who may have been their father. There are certainly times when we've worked with some very elderly mothers, and after they may become deceased, we've been contacted by siblings or family members who felt that it was possible to make contact, and often at times we've had them holding the information around who may be the father or who was who they know might have been the possibilities that it might have been. So even though that can be such a difficult thing for people when they for adopted people when they come to feel like they've really come to the end and they're just not going to get that information, there have been times when it does become available somehow, but they're rare. It's not common, but it does occur from time to time.
Yeah. So there's something about this this environment or this context for people in terms of managing as a worker that supporting clients, whoever they are, whether it's Jack or one of the other people involved, in managing these expectations and helping them to make sense of it, but some of it is perhaps not necessarily easily resolved. Is that part of the work then, is kind of holding this kind of uncertainty and helping people to manage that?
Very much. Yeah, very much holding, being able to support people, often in providing some long-term support in a range of ways when they really have come to a place where there is nothing further or things have stopped in terms of what they're trying to find out about or where they're trying to go to. And so this can be a really difficult place, and it's really important to have that support available. And it's a really large part of our work, because this occurs for many people, that they come to a point where there's no next step, or when they've made contact and the contact hasn't been accepted, and so and that is often devastating and difficult. So it's about supporting people to be able to manage what it feels like to not have the contact accepted.
Yeah. I also I absolutely agree with you, Catherine, and I think that holding also can happen or needs to happen when people do make contact and it's not what they thought it might be. So sometimes an adopted person will find their parents and find that, in fact, while they wanted information and quite a distant relationship, their mother or their father might want something much closer, or may in fact spend time talking at great length about their grief and loss, and may share how that's crippled them really throughout the rest of their lives. And that can be such a difficult situation to the adopted person, but also to their mothers or fathers if the adopted person then pulls away from that relationship. So I think there is a lot of that holding that happens as expectations are met or not met.
Yeah. And there's so much of that holding within the development of a relationship, when after contact has been made, that may go on for many years, in supporting people to be able to stay in the relationship for a whole range of reasons where it's not, as their expectations aren't being met, or they hope for it to be different, as you said. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that can be a big part of the work too.
Yeah. We've had a few comments from people. So Zuad, I hope I'm saying that name right, A number of clients I've treated after contacting birth parents have reported regretting having done so, that meeting biological parents has caused them trauma, added to the anxieties they already had because of being adopted. So I guess that's what you were talking about, I think, Jenny. Amelia's asked a question, what happens if Jack's reaction would include complete denial that he is the father? So I guess the case study so far had him trying to make sense of this. He's pretty shocked. He's trying to make sense of it. But what if he, you know, the father got to a point where he just denied it as one of the ways that he was making sense of it, just to say that can't be true, that can't be right. Is that something that could be a possible reaction, and what might be the considerations then?
Yes, I guess that is one of the possible reactions that Jack could make, and that could be very, for Philip, that might just absolutely confirm his sense of having been rejected by his father, and that might then lead him to say, well, that's it, you know, I always knew that was going to be a hopeless avenue to pursue, and I won't do anything. And Anna, but it may raise all sorts of issues for Anna as well. She may just feel, again, the whole sense of rejection and pain around that early experience that's continued for her. And sometimes Jack may need time. He may need a little bit more time to consider what's happening. He may just need to rethink again in his mind the events of the past. He may in fact even ask for verification through a DNA test. And if he did do that, then I guess that's up to the adult parties to agree to that, because there's nothing that can force anyone to do that. But it is definitely a possibility that Jack could take that path. But maybe time's needed, a little bit of time, give him space to digest the enormity of this news.
Yeah. One of the comments that Liz has made, which has included DNA testing, but also whether it's important for Jack to get legal advice. So is that something that might be part of this sort of exploring getting some of the practical things? Would legal advice be something you might suggest to people?
It wouldn't be something we would suggest very, very often. It'd be really rare circumstances that we might suggest that someone get legal advice. You know, I guess if there is any concern that Jack might have that he may not be the father, and so there might be some requirement to try and find that out, that might be a situation where he may you know, feel it's important to get some legal advice in relation to that. I mean, in terms of you know, DNA, there are the DNA tests that are just readily available online, and then there's, you know, the difference between that and court admissible DNA, depending on what the DNA might be used for. So there's very different tests and different costs and different processes. Yeah.
Yes, I agree with that. I think the purpose of the DNA test is so important to know. If it's just to confirm paternity, then I guess parties have to agree to that. If there's a legal implication around a will or something else, then I guess, yes, definitely seek legal advice.
Yeah. And the more we talk, the more complex it becomes, doesn't it? That there could be many different situations that could be playing out. So I guess it's really helping people work their way through all the possibilities. Susan's asked us about the supports available for Jack's partner and children. So his adult children. He's been married to his partner, who I've forgotten her name, but I had it written down. So Rebecca. Okay. And he's been married to Rebecca for 30 years, and they have 2 adult children, and, you know, they're kind of in this particular stage with their relationship in whatever state that's in their family, and now this news has happened. So, and at this point, Jack hasn't actually disclosed it. This is part of his decision around who does he tell, how does he tell, who does he tell, when does he tell. So I guess part of it would be helping him to make some decisions around that, and not, I'd be thinking the secrecy that happens at the time of birth. It sounds like it might also continue in a bit of a similar process many years later. And we've sort of hinted at that there's a bit of secrecy, perhaps as Jack's got this information, not sharing it immediately. But part of it might be then thinking, if Jack's going to share this information with his wife and children, what support's available for them? So how would you kind of manage that in your work?
In the post-adoption support service, we extend the service to anyone, any family member who's impacted in relation to adoption, including people who are direct parties to an adoption. So we would offer a service. Now, it may not sit within the post-adoption service, but it might. Normally, we'd have another worker within the service who might see family members. Sometimes we might see a family together to have a conversation and provide some education and information around adoption and the practices of the past, which may then help someone in terms of getting their head around, help children Jack's children, or help his partner to get their heads around why this might have happened, and that it wasn't something that just happened for Jack alone, but there were many people involved in this some years ago. So at times we may have children and partners and the person who has been directly affected coming together. We may have a conversation, a facilitated conversation around that. And sometimes we're seeing people individually. And that can be in an ongoing way. So it might be, there have been times when I've met with the children of people who have been found by an adopted person or have found their child, and there can be many different reactions from the children who grew up in that family. So sometimes they may have been the instigators in encouraging their mother or father to find the child who'd been adopted. So they may have encouraged them to do this, to find the information and to search for them, and then the reality of that has meant that they have a very different response when they actually make contact, or depending on what happens in the contact. So sometimes children are the instigators for their parent who may have been directly affected by adoption to go ahead and do this, to try and find the family member. Yeah. Sometimes the order in the family, so we often find that sometimes the eldest child in the family can be really impacted by the fact there's another child who is the eldest child. So the discovering that your role is really different, it's not as you thought, can have quite an impact as well. And certainly there are some, it can be very challenging in relation to partners and how they may view a contact period or a period of reunion. They may have all sorts of challenges and struggles in relation to the focus. Sometimes when in early stages in contact, people may be really focused in this relationship, trying to reconnect with and rebuild this relationship, and it can be really difficult for partners to manage the feeling that they have that their partner is put away from them while they're focusing on rebuilding a relationship with their child lost to adoption, or with a family, a sibling lost to adoption. So there can be all sorts of issues to manage in relation to that.
Yeah. We've got lots of comments, and I'm conscious our time's kind of ticking away. There's one comment from Cheryl about Jack's health status. We haven't mentioned that, but it might influence him in wanting to make contact with his son to convey relevant health information. So if there's some kind of genetic risk or something important health-wise, that might be a factor that might be considered in Jack wanting to, feeling like it's really important that he has contact with Philip. And other questions around support, I guess, and what happens in each state and territory. So that's come up a little bit. So Roseanne asked, is it a standard across all states and territories that identifiable information is available to all parties? So I think when we talked about this in planning the session, we thought it was best for people to make contact with their state-based services and to sort of check out and get from them some websites or some information or have a conversation. And there are services in each state. Relationships Australia in each state and Jigsaw in Queensland are the funded services that provide this support. So I think that's our safest bet, isn't it, to get people in touch with their state-based people and to sort through that. Anything else, Jenny or Catherine, about that?
No, I agree that it's probably best to get in contact with state-based service. And just to keep in mind that legislation is being, South Australian legislation is changing, and so the review's been completed, the legislation has been passed, and it will be enacted sometime this year. We don't have a date for that yet, but it should be hopefully before the third quarter of the year that the new legislation will be enacted, and that will make quite a big change to South Australian legislation because the veto system, the information veto system, which meant that you could be precluded from receiving any identifying information about your child or about your parent, will be lifted, will be changed. So there will be some contact statements available, so if people don't wish to have contact, those will be available for people, but information vetoes will be lifted. So that affects hundreds of people in South Australia.
Nice. So big changes.
Yes.
Yep. So it's a complex space, I guess, but there are support services and people like you who are out there to help people make sense of this. We are getting to the end of our webinar, so we've got a couple of minutes just for a bit of a summing up. And one of the questions was around success, and do you have success working with the clients in this client group? And I guess the question for me is probably what might success look like. So what if we have that as our question, a summing up question? What are you kind of working towards in terms of what success might mean? Because I guess depending on what's going on, it might look quite different for different people. Catherine, would you like to comment a bit of a summary statement, perhaps picking up on that?
I mean, success, I would say, is the perception of the client. So, but their expectation may really shift and move, and maybe a whole range of things that really impact on what success might look like. So I think it's really our job to be supporting people around those expectations and those hopes that may, that might be create some struggles in forming a relationship with a found family member, and providing ongoing support to try and negotiate the difficulties in rebuilding relationships and family restoration, so that the idea of what success might look like when someone might first come to us and what it might look like some years down the track could be very different.
Yeah.
But I think there are many clients that would say that they have levels of success. So, and that's a very rewarding part of the work.
Yep. Right. Thank you. And Jenny, parting comments around success and what it might look like?
Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? It looks...
Yes.
Hello? Yes. You can hear me. Okay. Look, I think success is it's a very movable feast for people. So success is a movable feast for people. For some people, obtaining information is what they have been after. Most people, I think, are possibly looking for some sort of relationship, and sometimes success is assisting and managing and to negotiate the ups and downs of this search and reconnection process that they're involved in. Sometimes surviving that process will be seen as success by them towards the end. Sometimes managing the disappointment of hopes that haven't been fulfilled will be success. With some people, the contact and the negotiation of the relationship turns into something that is more fulfilling than they ever expected, and that can be a wonderful surprise and a wonderful outcome. But I think success is, in this area of work anyway, is always negotiating the pain of loss and separation, and somehow through all of that finding yourself as intact as you can be in this situation, and I guess having a relationship that has integrity and that forms something not only for the party who's been searching, but for the generations that are to come as well. So success is a very difficult outcome, I think, or a very difficult word, if you like.
Shared in a way that highlights the sensitivities of this and really highlights the importance of, as a practitioner, having an ability to do that holding and to help sort through and to be there. It sounds like over a long term and being ready as people are ready at their pace, using language that makes sense to them, and looking at what growth and success might look like in each individual case. So I think you've really given us a great example in your presentations about what that looks like. So thank you very much to both of you, and I think it's given people lots of really useful information. Of course, we may also have raised lots more questions for people as well as we've talked about this and the complexities of it. And this is where I'll come back for a moment just to the training again that is available, and this was developed for the purpose of helping professionals who are working and faced with clients with these complex needs. So it is really helping us to tease out and think about what is it that we can be doing in our work. So the training is available. You can see there are a number of courses. The 8-hour course enables you, if you complete that, enables you to become part of a national forced adoption support network of health professionals. So people who finish that 8-hour course are able to then let us know that you'd like to be part of this network, and then we use that information to pass it on to the local funded service providers who then can be in contact with you about supporting them in their work, so that we are enabling more practitioners to be available for people, because we can see there's great needs for this. I mentioned at the start that this is our 7th webinar. We have one more to go. So this project has a final webinar, and then the learning and the webinars will all be available after that for another couple of years at this point. So our final webinar, look out for it, will be in May, and this is going to be around complex issues associated with forced adoption. So we've had complexity tonight, and we'll continue with the complexity again in the next webinar. So we're hoping that you'll join us for that. Thank you very much to our panellists for their time and their careful consideration of the case study and preparation of the information, and their time and efforts tonight. We've really appreciated that, and I can see from all the comments that people have really appreciated that as well. So thank you people at home as well, and people joining us later in the podcast for your participation as well. You will get a certificate of attendance, and when the recording becomes available, you'll be receiving an email to let you know about that as well, and you can log on and get more information about the webinars as well. Don't forget to hold on at the end to do our feedback survey. That's really important to us. We report back to the Department of Health, Commonwealth Department of Health, who fund us, and we report to them on the webinars, and that's really important to us to get that feedback as well. So thank you everyone again for your participation this evening, and best wishes in this continuing this journey, I guess, in this work, and supporting clients who come to us with these complex issues. So thank you very much, and good evening.